Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay McKenzie, and I chose to do sex and sexuality education in adolescence as my topic for my final project. And adolescence is the ages between 12 and 20, so that's kind of the age range I'm talking about throughout the presentation. And also, I wanted to do this topic because one, I feel like this is kind of a controversial topic in America, and I like discussing controversial topics. And two, I also think that this type of education is really important between kids and their parents, as well as within schools, just because I don't think it's talked about enough. And I also think that good and proper sex and sexuality education can really influence how teens see themselves and how they see relationships, and if they're going to have healthy relationships. And I just think it's an important thing. So, the book that I decided to use throughout this presentation was written by Allison Macklin, and it's called Making Sense of It, A Guide to Sex for Teens and Their Parents Too. And this book is geared more towards teens and it's made for them to read, but I found it really helpful in having good information to include in my presentation that I will discuss later. So before I get into it, I kind of just want to go over what I will be going through in this presentation. So first of all, I'm going to address the difference between sex and sexuality, because while they can be used interchangeably and they are used interchangeably, I think there's definitely a difference between them, and that should be laid out. And then why it is important, and then we'll go over biology, puberty, how parents can help with education, resources available to them, and then any questions that you guys might have, even though this is recorded, and then references. So, sex versus sexuality. So, sex, it can be used in different ways and it depends on the context, but within the class text and kind of within the book that I discussed earlier with Allison Macklin, it's referring to the physical act of sex, while sexuality is encompassing everything, including sex, who you are attracted to, what kind of sex you like to have, and which gender you identify with, which I think is a big factor in distinguishing these two things. So next I'll go over why it is important. I think there's lots of different reasons for why it's important, but some of the main ones that I wanted to bring up was to make safe and educated decisions. I think in the past and even currently, just depending on the state that you're in, a lot of places and schools and parents use scare tactics and abstinence only education. And while this can be helpful immediately in preventing, teens from having sex, it doesn't prepare teens and adolescents for the real world, and it doesn't give them tools they need to make educated decisions about their body, because essentially, as they're growing up, it will become their decision. Another reason this is important is because you want them to have a clear understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like. You want them to also have a clear understanding of what healthy sexual behavior is. It teaches them how to avoid STIs and unwanted pregnancies, gives adolescents a clear understanding of what consent and rape is, and it provides education on sexuality. It can help kids develop understanding and respect for people who are different to them, which I think is a big one. I think understanding people who are different from them can help them learn about not only the people who identify as heterosexual, but also people who are a part of the LGBTQ community, and kind of how they identify and how they can, learn to accept them if they are heterosexual, and how they can support them and just not have biases against them. So next I want to talk about biology. As adolescents grow, their minds develop as well, and different sections of the brain develop at different rates. And it affects how they mature into an adult and when they hit puberty, and just all the emotions that come with those things. So within the brain, there is the pituitary gland, and this one regulates bodily function, and is responsible for sexual maturation. The hippocampus, it regulates emotions and stores memories. The hypothalamus produces hormones but also controls behavioral functions like feeling tired, hungry, thirsty, and it also controls our sex drive. And then next we have the prefrontal cortex, which can develop all the way up into age 25, which is a very long time. And then it guides emotions and decides how your emotions react to memories given the context of each experience. So, this is just a very broad and basic overview of the brain, but I think it's helpful to know as you're kind of going through this section, sexuality education, and how your brain develops, when it develops in teens. So, biologically, girls and boys mature at different rates and different ages typically. So, this is a quote from our class book, and it is important to know that these changes that occur during puberty are different for boys and girls. Girls begin puberty around age 8, while boys start puberty around age 9, with each extending into early adulthood. Next, I'll go over how parents can help with education. So, first of all, they can create an open line of communication. And this was one of the biggest things in all of the references that I am using between the book, journals, and the class text that we have. Just creating an open line of communication that makes your kids feel comfortable coming to you and having these kind of awkward discussions. To accompany the last slide is to be an askable adult. So, similarly to having an open line of communication, being an askable adult is something that was talked about in the Macklin book that I chose to base this project on. And basically, she says that being an askable adult is being an adult who makes it comfortable for children to come to with like I said, awkward things like sex and sexuality education, and making sure that they feel safe asking those questions so that when they do approach these things in their own lives, they can ask you questions that might help them have a healthy relationship in the future. Another way parents can help is by understanding that the talk is not and should not be only one conversation. So it's a conversation that can happen throughout each stage of life, and especially as they're in their adolescence, it's a conversation that you can have, as often as it comes up. One of the techniques that's discussed in the book that I chose is that if you're watching a movie and a sex scene comes up and you're with your kid, is to not disregard it as an awkward moment, but kind of bring it up in the moment or bring it up, a little later after the movie and talk about it and ask them if they saw consent being given between, the two people and what they thought about it and if they have any questions. Instead of seeing it as an awkward moment, see it as an opportunity to talk about sex and sexuality. And then again, really similar to the first two things that I was talking about for parents, is to have a warm and close relationship with your kids. Again, this makes them feel comfortable to come to you with awkward questions regarding sex and sexuality, which can be so important as they're figuring out their own bodies and feeling comfortable with themselves, as well as they get older and have different kinds of relationships with different people. It's important to just have that close relationship so that they know they're safe to come to you with almost anything. So, some specific resources available to parents are books. And if you look to the right, those books that I put there are different age ranges to give children these books. So, the book It's Perfectly Normal is meant for 8 to 12-year-olds. The Wait What book is for 12 to 14-year-olds. And then that last book is for 12 through 20-year-olds, so much broader. But it just goes to show that you can start having this conversation with your kids fairly young, and kind of make them feel comfortable with the topic instead of making it more of a taboo thing. Another thing that parents can do, if their schools aren't providing programs for them or programs that you like as a parent, it's important to look for programs that include sexuality information, info on pubertal changes, psychological changes, maturation of their bodies, interpersonal skills, and information on contraceptive devices and just basic knowledge. Another specific resource is pre-made sex education lesson plans. Again, this is if you're not happy with, what your child's school is providing for you. So in my references, you'll see that there is a website with lesson plans dedicated to literally starting in kindergarten all the way up through their senior year of high school, and it's all age specific, so it's not too much too young. And they also have these lesson plans, each one, which there's over 100 of them, that each one also has a Spanish lesson plan, which I think is super good for children who, aren't, their first language isn't English. And it's very important to keep these things available to everybody. All right, that is my presentation. I put any questions. Obviously, this is recorded, but if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to ask me after you watch this in class or message me or something. I would love to talk about it with you. I think it's very interesting and controversial, and I'd love to know your guys' opinions. But that is my presentation. I hope it made sense. And here are my references, and I hope you all have a great day.